Welcome back to another episode of the Cameras and Coffee podcast. I'm sitting here with Galen, and we're talking about SEO friendly blog content that attracts photography clients on autopilot. And she's from Local Creative. Welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. So, this seems to be a topic that everyone freaks out about, I think, because they know that websiting and things on Google are what they really need to kind of move into. I feel like people are now understanding, at least business owners and especially in the photography world, that social media isn't going to do it all. Do you agree?
100%. So for me, if I look back at this past year, and everyone has this in their business and their life, like there are times where you have free time and you can be making reels 7 days a week and you can be posting
Yeah.
on social media all the time. But then there are times in business where either, client work is crazy, you're shooting a ton of weddings or whatever it is you do as a photographer, or things get in the way when it comes to life and you end up,
Yes.
having a home renovation, which is something we worked on this past year. And I just didn't have the capacity to show up on social media. But because I had a really strong content strategy in place, I was able to take months off, but still see those consistent inquiries coming in through my website because of that evergreen content that I created months or even years earlier that are still
Yeah.
working for me when I'm not necessarily on in the business world.
That's so true. And a lot of my bookings, they either come from a referral, and a lot of times it's like someone dropping my name in some forum, or it is through Google search. And I don't even think I'm ranking that high. I don't know. I need to figure out what they are searching because I don't know how they're finding me so easily. But yeah, I want to dive into this and kind of explore because I feel like this is something we're all wondering about. And maybe it's time to start digging in a little deeper. So, let's kind of talk about where you're coming from. Um, First of all, are you a coffee drinker?
I am. So I am a coffee drinker. I am such a wimp when it comes to caffeine though. So I have to like have coffee and limitations. I'm a big espresso drinker. Like I love
Oh,
lattes. So I would say some of my favorite, I have like a couple favorites. I couldn't pick just one. Right now, my favorite thing is a matcha latte, which I know is
oh,
not necessarily coffee. It's a tea latte, but that's my favorite.
yeah.
And if I had to pick a latte as my favorite, it would be a lavender latte, which my favorite coffee shop
Oh,
has. I'm obsessed with coffee
interesting.
shops. I go like 3 days a week just to
Same.
get out of my office to be able to get some concentrated work done.
Well, it's it's something you have to do because when you're a business owner that works for like at home, you gotta get out of there just for some people interaction. Even if you're not, like, working one-on-one, it's just the community of working in a space of other people makes such a huge difference for your morale. Like, you just need to be we're not meant to be alone. So, when you're alone all the time, it's just you just crave it. I do anyway. I don't know if you feel that way, but that's where I'm like, "I gotta get out of my house. I gotta go do this and work around other people."
Yes,
For
and at
sure.
home, I have, like, a huge pile of laundry sitting next to me or,
Yeah.
like, dishes that need to be cleaned, but when I go to a coffee shop, it's just, like, me and my computer and, like, the hustle and bustle of other people getting work done, and
Yep.
I love it. It's my favorite.
There's something about that that motivates me to keep moving. I don't know. Because, yeah, when you're
Yes.
at home, you're like, "Oh, there's my bed. I could just go take a nap." Or the dog needs a walk, or, yeah, I can run this load of dishes. It's just there's always work at home, and so
And
sometimes you
I
just need to get out.
Yes, and I know what time they'll close or, like, how long I have to
Oh,
spend there, so I'm, like, racing the clock to see how much I
yeah.
can get done in this time that I have set aside to be at the coffee shop, so I'm so productive.
Yeah, makes a huge difference. Well, let's kind of dig into what your career path looked like and how you got to where you are now. So, yeah, let's kind of dig into that a little.
Oh my goodness. So, I've been in business for 10 years, over 10 years at this
Wow.
point. Right out of college, I ended up getting a job at a marketing agency. I moved across the country. This is like what I wanted to do. I moved across the country, took this job, had never even been to the city that the job was in. I'm from the East Coast, so I
Wow.
moved out west. started working for this marketing agency. And while I did love it, I learned so much. I was working with Fortune 500 companies and doing all these really cool marketing campaigns. I realized long term that's not what I wanted to do. Like, I didn't see
Mm,
myself climbing the ladder within that industry. And a ton of people in my family are entrepreneurs. And I think I just had the bug from a really young age. And so after being there for like a year, year and a half, I ended up against the recommendation of a lot of my family members quitting that job to start my own business because
mm,
I knew at that point I wasn't making enough money that I couldn't replace it with my business at some point soon. Like, I didn't want to wait
mhm,
till I was so far along in my corporate career that it was going to be really hard to leave and I had all these expenses and my quality of life had improved so much. So for me it was like great to be able to quit early on, because I definitely struggled for those first couple years as a business owner. I moved
mm,
into this really tiny apartment. I moved back across the country into this tiny little apartment to start things from scratch. And it took a couple years, but I started working with local clients first. I'm a web designer. I do web designer, SEO consulting, and then I also teach an online course about SEO. And I just love like content creation and evergreen content in general. So I was trying to
mm,
do all of these things and grow my client base at the same time. And it just took a couple years to kind of get it going. If I knew then what I know now, it would be a lot easier. But I was just winging it, flying by the seat of my pants, trying to figure it
yeah,
all out as like a young 20 something. And yeah, so that started to grow and my business kind of developed and changed over time. Um,
mm,
and now I would say my business is probably 70 to 80% web design with SEO. I do SEO for all my web design clients, and then I do
mhm,
SEO consulting on top of that, with my online courses and education and content and everything like that. But yeah, it's grown a lot over time. We've rebranded a couple of times in there. But 10 years later, we're still kind of doing the same things. It's just I have a little bit more of a team now. I feel more supported.
mm.
And I'm definitely a much more confident and strategic business owner than I was when I first started.
Wow. Yeah, and I know, like, being on the West Coast too, like, that cost of living is so much different than the East Coast. So it's like, I don't know. Like, when you say, like, worried about getting stuck in those things, I totally get it. Because my husband and I have this dream, like, from being from Michigan, that someday we wanna live in California because 'cause we're like, "It's always warm there," like
No snow.
like, we would not be able to live at least with our family, I'm like, "We could not live in California and afford a house. There's no way." It's
It's
just
crazy.
yeah, so kind of explain to me what evergreen means. So kinda go into that a little bit.
Yeah, so creating evergreen content is any type of content that you can create one time and it'll continue to work for your business or brand in
Mhm,
the long run. And so it's not just about the type of content that you're creating. For example, like typically an Instagram feed post would not count as evergreen content because you're posting it once, people are maybe going to see it for a few days,
mhm,
maybe up to that week point, and then it sort of starts to drop off after that and it's not going to continue to show up in people's feeds after that point. But a blog post, on the other hand, or a YouTube video, or even a podcast episode in some cases, can be content that you create one time and people find it weeks,
mhm.
months, years later. Not only is that content still relevant in terms of the value provided in that content, but it's also based on the platform and how searchable or findable that piece of content is. Like your blog post can get picked up in Google and it can rank better 6 months from now than it is going to rank
Yeah,
in 2 weeks, which is really cool to think that it can actually grow and improve its rankings over time and do better in the
yeah,
future. One of my most popular blog posts on my blog at this point, I think, is like 3 or 4 years old. And it's
mm,
crazy that one piece of content that I've maybe tweaked a couple times just to kind of update things in it, to keep them relevant with
yeah.
today, that one blog post has brought in so many new email subscribers and leads for my business.
Yeah, that's just nuts when I think about that. But I do think we live in a society where we feel that things should just happen instantaneously. And when you're thinking about SEO, you got to think for the long run. And so I feel like that is something that a lot of people just don't understand when they are doing businesses and they think, oh, I'm not getting business. I'm going to quit. But it's like, just give it time. Like, you gotta you gotta be in for the long run. It's just Yeah, which is hard for me because I am a very driven person, like, when I do something, I want
Results.
get it. Yeah. Well, not only that, but I wanna, like, make it like, I just do something until it's completed, and sometimes I'm just like, "Okay, now what?" And so, I'm always trying to get to the next level. I don't know. So, it is one of those things where yep, you gotta remind yourself it is all about the long run. But
And it's funny being somebody who knows that, and, like, even
mhm,
coming from my corporate job, we focused a lot on SEO with our marketing campaigns, so, like, I knew this, I had it in my brain that this is what works, and this is what's going to continue to propel my business forward, even during those slow seasons, even during those times where I can't always show up. It still took me years to be able to put a sustainable content marketing plan in
mm,
place, which I'm really embarrassed to say. It's like, you can know that it's gonna work, but until you actually put the time in to make
mhm,
it work and stick to it consistently, I think it was right around like 2018, 2019, where I started posting consistently to my blog, really consistently, not just like a few months and
mm,
stop, a few months and stop. And it was that year, like the following year, 2020, 2021, where it started to just like completely snowball and build that momentum. And it was like so
mm.
reassuring that that work I had done previously had paid off, but it just took time to create that
Yeah,
content and to have that plan in place.
yeah. That's so true when you when you say it takes you that long to get to there. Um, let's kinda dive in as from a standpoint of someone who's never even thought of SEO. So let's say this is a new photographer, they have no idea what we're talking about. I'm pretty sure most people do at this point,
You
but
never know.
let's kind of start from the beginning. So first of all, what is SEO?
Yes, SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it's the process of making changes on your website or any content really that you're creating to give that content a higher chance of showing up in search organically. And what I mean by organic is unpaid content. So there's paid search, right? That's like pay per click or paying for,
Mm,
showing up higher in search engines, and then there's organic. I focus primarily on organic, meaning that you're optimizing your content, your website to show up higher organically or without paying to have those
mm,
search engines show your content to new potential clients, leads, whatever it is, in search engines like Google. It could be YouTube. Pinterest is also a search engine. TikTok is becoming more and more of a search engine. So it's really
mm.
cool to see
Yeah.
all these new channels popping up.
Yeah. And I know it's funny because when I talk to some fellow colleagues, they're always like, "Can we just like pay someone to make us rank higher?" I'm like, "In a way, yes, but not like instantaneously." It's just it's one of those things. Again, the microwave method. You just want it right away. But kind of tell me, when talking about blogging, well, actually, let's kind of take a step back. Let's go back to like your website design because I feel like when we're talking blogging, we need to talk about from the base. Um, so, when designing a blog, what would you say maybe photographers are missing or should have when they have a blog? Um, as far as like the main page of like, here's all my blog posts to here's the actual blog post. What should they have in there?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring it back even just a little bit further. So if we're looking at your site in general, I always
Yeah.
like to first start with having a really clear idea of who your ideal client is and
Mm,
making sure that especially the homepage on your website goes into who you are, what you do, and where you do it. So, what is your
mhm.
specific location, or what locations do you serve as a photographer, and what type of photography that you do? That's
Yeah.
so important to set that foundation for your site because your blog is really a piece of the site and you want everything to work together. There's a lot of SEO companies out there that will charge you monthly to optimize your website or to make changes
Mm,
to your website. And unless they're creating content for you, I'm a firm believer that you can kind of set up that foundation one time time for your site in general and be pretty good for a while. You want to kind of set it up one time, maybe check back in a few months, see how it's doing, maybe make some small tweaks, but you're not necessarily doing things every single month to improve your website. As a photographer, you know, if you
Mhm.
did this full time, maybe you would be not photography, but if you did like website stuff or blogging full
Yeah.
time, maybe you'd be spending a little bit more time. But I don't want photographers to think that they need to be in their site every single day tweaking keywords and changing things. It's like
Yeah.
set it and forget it. Check back in a few months. Let's see how it's doing, and we
Mhm.
can determine, you know, what changes you want to make, or if you want to update things. But your blog, that's really the thing that you want to be updating on a somewhat regular basis. And it's not because the Google algorithm necessarily favors sites that are being updated all the time. Like, I feel like Instagram punishes me when I don't show up for several months.
Mm,
I
mhm.
haven't found the same thing to be true with Google. They don't care so much. It's more about creating enough content that you're giving yourself the opportunity for that content to actually do well and take off. Like, the more you write, the more you create content, the better you're going to be at creating that content.
Mm.
It's like a muscle that you work, it gets stronger. The better you're going to be at creating that content, and the more likely that next piece of content that you create is going to be the one that really starts to take off for your site.
Yeah, I agree. Um, so there's certain things now I use Show It and it kind of gives me a template for like my main blog. So like here's all my blog posts. Go ahead and click on there. And then they have like the single blog posts type of thing. And then they have like when you're searching. So when you have like all of your blog posts out there, what do you recommend having on there? Now there's always like the image for like the header image of your or featured image, I think is what it's called,
Yes.
and then a description and a title. Do you think that there's like a difference if you have like the description of your blog post, whether you have that or not? I
Like
don't
on your
know.
main blog page?
Yeah.
So typically, your main blog page is not going to be the page on your site that ranks super well in
Oh,
search.
good to know.
It can in some instances, you know, if you have a really niche blog and your blog page in and of itself is providing a lot of value, but typically it's almost always the individual post pages that are going to be the
Mm,
ones that rank very well in search. So I'd rather see you put your energy into those individual posts than the actual primary blog page itself. But I'm a Show It user as well. I design both Squarespace and Show It websites for my clients, so I'm very familiar with the Show It WordPress integration and getting that all set up behind the scenes.
yeah, and I think a lot of times there's like and I know that, like for me, I try to like get as much done in the winter time because that's my slow season. And so I'm always like, okay, what do I have to post in there? So I'm trying to create as much content as I can and then have it scheduled out for the whole year. But when we kind of go back to like putting those blog posts together, and on a main page, what would you suggest is key for having in that blog post that um because I know for me in the beginning I was constantly doing like here's an image, here's a title, here's a description, let's say of a wedding, here's all the images. Now I know now like that's probably not the best method for ranking with SEO, but tell someone who has no idea what they should be having in that.
Yeah. So if we're looking at the structure of a blog post, we can look at two different things, like the actual content of the blog post and how somebody is formatting it, what content they're including in that. But we can also look at the type of topics that they tend to kind of lean towards. And I think all photographers do this. So if this is you, please do not feel bad if you're listening and you're like, oh no, this is me. But so many photographers, every blog post that they're creating is either geared towards very general tips for somebody who's looking to
Mm,
hire a wedding photographer, for example, or it is geared towards sharing weddings that they've shot in the past. So it'll be like you said,
mhm.
one wedding featured or one photo shoot featured. It's got a title with the couple's names, maybe a little bit of details about the couple, a little bit of a description of the wedding, and then just like a photo dump of all of the photos, right?
Mhm.
That's like a pretty typical photography blog post. But if we look at that, Like I said, normally the title will have like the couple's names in it and maybe the venue, but that's not a particularly interesting title to Google. We are not
Mm,
trying to target that couple with those names. Like we are trying to target new people who have never heard about us before. And so you want to
mhm,
think about gearing your blog content more towards couples who are in the early stages of planning their wedding. Maybe they are investigating venues in your area, really specific local content if you can, like giving somebody a tip on how to hire a wedding photographer or how to get, should they do or not do a first look is fine. But you, as a photographer in Michigan, aren't trying to attract a couple in New Mexico who's wondering if they should do a first look, right? Like that's not going to
yeah,
be helping you um, get new clients from your location. I mean, if you're a traveling photographer, maybe that's one thing. But what I would say is you want to think about your blog becoming the top resource for couples in your area who are planning their wedding. And I'm
mm,
not just talking about photography here. We always want to look at it through the lens of a photographer because that's who you are and that's the
mhm,
expertise that you are bringing to the table. We want to focus so much more on how can I become almost like my blog becoming like a guide for couples in the early stage of wedding planning, figuring out how they want to plan their wedding in my specific area. So in Michigan, that could be writing blog posts that are like the top wedding caterers in the area,
mm,
or flower inspirations for spring weddings in this particular, like on Lake Michigan, right? So pulling
mhm,
from your photos from weddings that you've done, pulling from inspiration, but it's not just sharing one wedding at a time. It's pulling together like themes from all the weddings that you've shot and sharing images from all these different weddings based around a specific topic that's focused on your location and that's focused on helping couples in that early stage of planning, like figure out what they want their wedding to look and feel like.
yeah, and I think it's huge in the moment of because there's a lot of photographers, especially when they're getting started, they're like, "How do I get clients that I love? Like, I keep getting this type of client. How do I get these kinds of clients?" And I think that's huge when it comes to who are you talking to? Are you just talking to the masses, or are you talking to a specific type of client that you want to attract? And so that is a huge thing to consider when you're writing those resources, and you want to bring those specific people in. I'm sure you agree.
Yes, and so one of my favorite things to recommend to photographers when it comes to their blog, and it's nice because, normally people who are listening to this, you're listening to this along with other photographers from all over the world probably. And so you can take these tips and you're not necessarily competing with the person next to you, you're competing with the person in a
Hmm.
completely different market. So it's not really a competition. But when you're thinking about blog posts to create, one of my favorite ones is a venue guide, because what is the first thing that a couple does before they hire a photographer, before they figure out, what they're going to be doing
Hmm.
for food or anything else, right? They need to book their venue to make sure that that date is available and they have that first step in the process done. And sometimes they'll have been eyeing your photography work for years and
Hmm.
they'll be so excited to hire you specifically, but a lot of times they start with that venue. So
Yep.
creating something like a venue guide on your website through your blog, outlining all these venues, reaching out to the venues, telling them that you want to feature them on your blog,
Hmm.
asking about like general quotes for like how much does it cost to get married at this venue. You could even ask the venues to provide like a little description or a little bit of information that you could give to potential couples on your blog, and you're creating this. And even if, like you were saying, sometimes the clients you're working with aren't necessarily the ones that you want to attract, you could reach out to these venues in the off season and say,
Hmm.
I've never shot a wedding here, but I would love to. Could I just come by and take some pictures of the space, when it's quiet on a Monday afternoon so I can highlight you
Hmm.
on my blog? But say that venue's at a higher price point than maybe some of the ones you're currently shooting at, but it's like goals for you. Go
Yeah.
there, ask them if you can take some pictures, feature them on your blog, and then you'll find a couple who's like dead set on getting married at that venue or is exploring venues
Yeah.
more in that, luxury price range, and you'll come up in Google for that, and they might end up booking you as a photographer because they love your
Hmm.
work and they see that you've featured this particular venue that they're excited to get married at.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because that was kind of how I moved into the luxury market. Not only that, but like taking as many detail shots and making it look luxury and featuring that more. Um, And there's a way to do it. It's just when you have a lower end wedding, how can you make things look rich and more expensive in those ways? And so that was kind of like how I moved into that and then featured that on my blog. Um, Now, I'm not saying that all weddings should be photographed to look how you want it on your blog, but if you have moments in a wedding day to do that and you're trying to attract more luxury clients, that would be an option. Um, let's kind of talk about content and not necessarily for wedding photographers, but like what's a good content strategy for I don't know if you want to like discuss specifically a niche of photography or like photography in general. You can kind of choose either way.
Yeah, so like a content plan in general in terms of like timing and how to kind of structure things behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of systems. I love talking about systems in my business. So
Same.
regardless of what kind of photographer you are, I think it's really important when it comes to tackling your content strategy that you have something in place behind the scenes that just shows you, what are your topic ideas that you
Mm.
have ready to go. And this ideally is like an app or something that you can have on your phone. So when you are, about to get out of your car at the grocery store and something pops into your head, you can open the app on your phone and jot down this idea for a blog post that you might want to create. So making sure that you have like a list of content ideas. I personally use a free tool called Notion. I
Mm.
have a ton of videos about Notion on my YouTube channel, but I
Okay.
love Notion for content planning. It's basically my like project management tool. It's not my client management tool, but it's what I use for project management. So it's
Okay.
like all the internal stuff of my business lives in Notion. I have like all
Mm.
my internal processes in there. I have all of the content that I plan on creating, and I have it all kind of like mapped out on a calendar. And it's kind of like if Google Docs and Airtable had a baby. Like it's like a very kind of
Interesting.
like
Okay.
you can actually create the content inside of Notion, which I love
Huh.
too. Um so I will have like a list of topic ideas, and then I actually will like drag those topics over to a calendar view with inside of Notion. And then within each blog post, I'm able to start drafting out the post in there. Notion integrates with, they have now what's called Notion AI, which is basically
Okay.
AI built right into Notion. And while I don't recommend having AI write your blog post by any means, I think that it should come from you. It should sound like you. You want your blog to be a representation of who you are as a person, but it can be great for like just starting the idea process. It can come up with
Mm.
title ideas
Yeah.
for your blog post. It can help you outline a blog post if you're not sure where to start. It can help you figure out how to say something in a different way. And so it's just really nice to kind of
Sure.
have that in your back pocket as an assistant. So I absolutely love Notion and Notion AI for that. So I drag everything over to my calendar. I kind of start drafting out the post to get the core of the post down. Then once I have that post, I will go through and think about, okay, how can I incorporate more of the keywords into this post that I'm trying to target? And there's a lot of ways to do keyword research. As somebody who is a local business. So most photographers are local, regardless of what kind of photography you do. You need to physically go
Mhm.
to, work with your clients in that area. It's usually not as competitive. So you're not going to get as much out of keyword research, because keyword research, like if you're using these big keyword research tools, it can be very broad and you're looking for like specific, your market where you live.
Mm.
So keywords for your like small town aren't necessarily going to show up with a ton of search traffic in these keyword tools. So while I think keyword tools can be great, I really like more so just looking at like, okay, what questions are my potential clients asking me? What questions do my
Mm.
potential clients have about this, this phase of their life? Or, if they're a newborn photographer, for example, what questions do they have about when should I have newborn photography done? What should I have for an outfit for
Mm.
newborn photography? What should I bring to my newborn photography session? All of these kind of things are things that they're asking. Or the location side of that is looking at like if you're a newborn photographer, looking at daycare options, like childcare options in your area. That feels so
Mm,
far from photography, but you're
yeah.
targeting people who have kids. And so
Yep.
you're going to end up finding that they come to you for photography because they realize you're just a great resource for parents of young children in your area who might be having more kids
Mhm.
soon and might end up hiring you. So it's like industry related content and location specific content for your target audience.
Yeah.
If you were a brand photographer, you could look at topics related to like what are some great entrepreneurial meetups in the area? What are the best co working spaces in your area? What are the best coffee
Mm,
shops with Wi Fi in your area, right? These are all things that are, again, not necessarily related to photography, but are fantastic resources. So back to the like planning part of it, I put everything in Notion, I kind of map it out. um, I would say when it comes to cadence of how often you're posting content, there is no right or wrong answer. It's much
mm,
more about picking a cadence that works for you and your lifestyle, which I know is difficult. I think a lot of people tend to say like, "Oh, of course I'm going to publish once a week. It's going to be great. I'm going to get, a new blog post out there every week." Then they start and they're like, "Oh, this is not scalable." They
y
do it for 2 weeks and then they quit because they have already let themselves down by not meeting those
mhm,
goals. So I tell them instead to really think about like, okay, are you the type of person who tends to set big goals and not follow through, which is okay. We've all been there. That happens to the best of us. And if that's you, take that initial goal and let's cut it in half. Maybe it's one post every 2 weeks or one
mm,
post a month, even is going to be so much more beneficial than having gone all 12 months of a year and not
yeah,
posting a single thing. So it's not about how often you're posting, it's about what feels good and what feels sustainable for you.
yeah. No, that's good. Um, I wanna kind of go back to the things that you're saying, like, adding in there. So, like,
Yeah.
location, um, and specifics. What is let's say you're trying to attract a client that is in your area. What are some key things that you should have in the copy or the title or whatever? What should they have in there?
Yeah.
As far as not really the topic, but like location and content, I guess is the
Yes, that's a
question.
great question. So first you kind of need to look at like what is the goal of this blog post? What question is it answering? How is it helping my ideal clients? And whatever the primary focus of that blog post is, that's likely going to be your primary keyword.
Mm,
And that should include a location if it's a location specific post. And not every post you create has to necessarily be specifically for ranking in search. Sometimes you can just create a blog post on your blog because you're trying to update your audience, or you're trying to
mm,
nurture your potential clients, right? Like there's different goals for blog posts. But if you're like, I want this blog post to get found by this specific type of person who is searching for this thing, that's going to be the primary keyword that you're focusing on.
excuse me.
And I recommend, God bless you. Um, and I recommend that you include that in your blog post title. And really try to have an interesting blog post title. So many photographers just go with the
Mm,
most boring blog post titles. Not only should your blog post title tell me what is in the post, but it should also make me excited to read that post. Like I hate the
mm,
word clickbait, but your title should like get me excited about the value that
mhm.
I'm going to receive in that post. Um, so give me a reason to want to read that post based on the title and making sure that you
Yeah,
have the keywords that you're looking for in that title. Then, when we get into the blog post itself, it's important to then restate that primary purpose, that primary keyword in your first sentence or two of that blog post. You want to make sure
okay.
that right when somebody starts reading, they are basically reconfirming of what they're going to learn in this post and how it's going to be beneficial to them. And then Google's again seeing that right in that first line or two of that blog post is going to be important. And then you want to break down that post into a series of headings and content, paragraph content. So,
Mm,
if it's you're breaking it down, it could be a list style post, it could be a post that just has different tips or different ideas in it. Each one of those should be broken down into a heading. Ideally, your H1, your heading one is always going to be your title. You only want one H1 per blog post. It's done automatically typically, if you use something like Show It or WordPress or Squarespace, like the H1 is the title. But in
yeah.
your post, you want to have um, heading 2, which is going to be that second tier heading, and that's going to kind of break down the subtopics. And then if you have any subtopics, those are going to be H3s kind of like nested within those H2s. So your H2s break down the main topics of that post, and then your H3s can take it a step further if you're trying to like break that idea or concept down even further. And what I will say is a lot of times photographers forget to add the context to their blog post. So, for example, um, I will say, who is it? Like newborn photographers will talk about the fresh 48. I don't know if you've heard of that, but basically,
Mhm.
like, getting that photos in those first 48 hours, right? But as a potential client, they don't know what a fresh 48 is. Like, that doesn't
Mm.
necessarily mean anything to them. So, making sure that you are using terminology that your ideal clients use, not just terminology that you as somebody in the photography industry knows. And that applies to any type of photographer. There's always going to be things that you talk about that other people in the industry will understand, but your ideal clients won't. So just keep that in mind as you're creating your headings and you're
Yeah,
creating your
that's good.
content in that post. Make sure that your ideal clients will understand and make sure that you have the context there so that it makes sense.
No, that's so good. Because I think we get so stuck in what we're constantly working with, we don't think from the other side. And I think that happens even for people who are not photographers, that use a lot of acronyms and they don't think about breaking that. I mean, even using the term SEO, like what does that mean? Like break it
Yes.
down for me. Yeah, and just kind of knowing like what that is. So that's so good. I think I always think back to being in Michigan and people know what an open house is. Well, like we have open houses for seniors in high school. Well, the rest of the country doesn't call them open houses. They call them graduation parties. And so it's like something we don't think about. So like are you trying to attract what are you trying to attract and kind of know more than those kinds of things. That's so big.
Not
Um
only that, but if you think about this too, I've worked with a lot of, I do a ton of websites for photographers. So I've worked with a lot of senior photographers, and the number of
mm,
times I have to tell them that the word senior mostly applies to senior citizens. So if you're not
yes.
careful, Google might think that your entire site is geared towards elderly people and not
Mhm.
graduating seniors. So I'm like, the context is very important. Is it a high school senior, a college senior, or are we talking about senior citizens here? Because the two are very close. There's a fine line and you need to have that context so it's clear.
Yeah, that is very good to point out because I remember having that this was when I changed it on my website to say high school senior because I started getting inquiries for like 65 and olders and they're like, "I'm a senior, like how do I book this?" And
Like,
I was
no.
like it was one of those things where like my contact form had like click what kind of session you're looking for and it was like senior session. And I realize I'm like, they're not like a high school senior. They're a senior citizen. That is hilarious. So that's when I started changing everything. Like, okay, take a step back and realize like what is coming through that. So that's a great thing to point out.
Maybe that's like the next up and coming photography niche is like senior citizen sessions.
Hey, I did have someone ask me for a golden girl session, and I was like, is that a thing? And I was like searching, and I was like, maybe I need to make it something. 'Cause she
There you
wanted
go.
photos of her mom, and I was like, "Yeah, that's something maybe to, like, kind of throw in there, a golden girl session." I love
You
it.
never know.
Yep, never know. Could be the next new thing. So, I'm gonna, patent that right now. Um, Now let's kind of talk about, things that you can add to your blog maybe to help with SEO. Do you have recommendations for those? Or do you think that they're just kind of a waste of money, waste of time? What is
Do
your
you mean
thought
in
on that?
terms of like plugins or different add-ons and things like that?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So, definitely if you are a WordPress user or a Show It user that uses WordPress for blogging, you want to have some sort of SEO plugin on your site. Typically, Show It right out of the box integrates with Yoast as their SEO
Mhm.
plugin. Yoast is a great option. I'm also really loving one called SEO Press right now that I use for a lot of my clients. They have a really affordable, like pro version of their plugin.
Mm.
Um, and it's just great for that initial setup. But behind the scenes of every blog post is going to be your page title and your meta description. Almost
Yeah.
always, your page title is like it's basically the same thing as your post title. So it's going to be almost exactly, like a variation of your post title. And then your description, your meta description, is not necessarily great for SEO in the traditional sense. Like it's not helping your site rank higher per se, but what it does do is it is that little snippet that typically shows up in Google below your listing. And so you
Mm.
want your meta description to again be really juicy and get people excited about what they're going to read in that post, because your meta description could be the difference between them clicking on your link in Google search results versus somebody
Mm.
else's link, because your meta description did a great job of being like, here's why you should care. Here's why you should read this. Get excited. Click this link. You don't have to tell them to click the link, but the goal of
Yeah.
it should be, here's what to expect in this blog post and why you should care, hoping that they choose your link over somebody else. And the more that somebody clicks on your search result, it's actually going to help it rank higher in search. So getting those
Mm.
clicks, if you're third in search and you're getting more clicks than the person who's second, you might actually move up and take that spot if you continue to get more clicks there.
Mm. Good to know. Yeah. I was trying to remember what I was going to ask you. I was like, all of a sudden I got so wrapped up in that. Um,
I have a few other keyword tools I could mention, or like SEO tools in general.
yeah, well, I know I wanted to kind of go into kind of like researching your rankings. So like do you have recommendations for like programs to use to know how you're ranking, or like kind of understand like how can I do better? Like what in my website is actually getting um looks and clicks? Like how do I find that out?
Yeah. So first, I always recommend that everybody sets up the big 3 Google tools when it comes to SEO. The first one is Google Analytics, very easy. Set up Google Analytics on your site. Typically, you're just for most website platforms, there's like a little space where you can just copy and paste in the code. Show It has it,
Mm,
Squarespace has it. Sometimes you have to like install it separately, but almost always it's like there's a spot to put that in. So you just set up your Google Analytics
yeah.
account, copy that code, paste it in. And the reason you want to set that up sooner rather than later is that even if you don't understand it or don't know, anything about the data that you're collecting, it won't start collecting until you put that code in. So if years
Yeah.
from now you decide to actually look at it and do something with it, you now have all this historical data. So I highly recommend setting up Google Analytics. Then you're going to set up Google Search Console. This is a really powerful SEO tool. So Google Analytics shows you how users are interacting with your website, what pages they're going on,
Mm,
how they're kind of navigating your site. Google Search Console is showing you how your website and Google are working together. So it's showing you
mm,
what keywords you're showing up for. It's showing you, how your website is ranking for certain keywords. It's showing you how your search traffic is increasing over time or not increasing, or which pages are doing particularly well in
yeah.
search. That's another really great one to set up. And then lastly, you're going to want to set up your Google Business profile, which was previously called Google My Business. They changed the name of these things, I feel like, every
Oh,
year.
okay.
So the Google Business Profile is basically how you show up in Google Maps. And even if you don't have a
Mm,
separate studio and you are traveling to your photography clients, you can still set this up. And I highly recommend it because you will show up in Maps. You can put in your home address, for example, and then you can hide your home address. So your
oh,
actual
okay.
physical home location doesn't show up, but you as a business still show up. You can get reviews, which is really important. And it just basically helps your website show up when somebody is searching for a photographer
Yeah.
who does what you do in your specific area. So those are the big 3 Google tools that I recommend. And then on top of that, there's a number of other tools that you can use to kind of track things. A lot of them are pretty expensive, like there's SEM Rush. There's like a bunch of different ones out there, but for businesses who do not do SEO as their full-time thing, I always recommend Uber Suggest. That's a really great
Mm,
tool
mhm.
because it's pretty affordable monthly. I found the data to be fairly accurate. It integrates with Google Search Console. No SEO tool is perfect, but that's a really great one. They also right now have like a one-time lifetime payment that you can make to get access to it, which is really
Oh,
cool.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you could pay monthly or you can pay like one time. And I have found that's a really approachable tool for business owners who don't know a lot about SEO, but just kind of want to keep track of things over
Yeah.
time and get some basic recommendations, run some SEO audits on your site, things like that.
Well, and that's when I use the free version and it lets you do like 3 searches a day.
Yeah,
So it's like I can search mine and then 2 other competitors and see where they're ranking that are I'm like, "How are they doing?"
there you go.
Um, so yeah, that is one that I've used before, but yes. Oh, so good. Well, let's kinda touch a little bit on those keywords that you were mentioning before we wrap up. You were mentioning some keyword suggestions.
Yeah, so Uber Suggest can help with your keywords. There's another tool called Keyword Surfer,
Mm,
which I don't necessarily think is the most accurate in terms of telling you, like, if Keyword Surfer is a Chrome extension that you can add to Google Chrome, and anytime you type
okay.
something in the search bar, it will show you like how much traffic a particular website is getting for a particular keyword or something like that.
Oh,
I don't
interesting.
think it's necessarily the most accurate. Like, I've looked at it for my own site, and I'm like, these numbers are totally wrong, but it is great for giving you like alternative keyword ideas. You can put in one
Mm,
particular topic and it will give you other ideas based on that topic.
hmm,
And another one, and that one's free. And another one I really like is called Keywords Everywhere. And that one you just pay for credits up front. And Keywords
okay,
Everywhere, again, is a Chrome extension. And you can search something like type a particular keyword into Google, and it will give you a ton more ideas based on
okay.
that keyword. And it'll show you the search volume for each keyword. So those are all like kind of great tools just to get some ideas
Yeah.
for keyword research. But at the end of the day, especially as a small business, I don't necessarily think you need to be doing a ton of keyword research. I think that you can, especially as a local business, focus on this more like niche. They're called long tail keywords, basically keyword like multi-word keywords that target
Mm,
very specific things where the competition is lower, but if the right person searches for that, they are your exact ideal client. So even if Google
okay.
tells you like this keyword has 10 visits per month, it doesn't matter if you're ranking number 1 and those 10 people are your exact ideal client. Like that's perfect. So just take kind of general keyword research with a grain of salt as a small local business and think about how can I help my clients? How can I help them specifically in my location, right? Like, what location based information can I give them? And instead of just like, how can I share one past session? How can I take different themes or different ideas from all of my past sessions and kind of incorporate them into different helpful topics for
Mm,
my ideal clients specifically?
no, that's good. Um, okay. So with all of this, let's say I'm a very new photographer or very new to blogging. Where should I start? Like if it's
Yeah.
my first time doing a blog post, what would you say would be like the first thing they should do?
I would make a list of frequently asked questions that you are getting from ideal clients. And I would just start one at a time, kind of going through and creating one post for each one, incorporating some
Mm,
images, but take your time. Like it does not have to be something that we're not trying to put out hundreds of blog posts a year or anything like that.
yeah.
I would say quality is going to be better than quantity, and I try to make sure that for a small business, every blog post that you're creating should have at least 500 words at a very minimum. If you can
Mm,
go higher than that, that's great, but think about how you can create really quality content around a particular topic and how you can, like I said, this is the biggest thing, how can you become an expert or a guide or a resource for people who are in the early stages of whatever it is that you help them
yeah.
with through photography. So how can you, like, what's that one step before they hire you? How can you help that person and guide them through whatever stage of life they're at, to help them get to that next stage and just kind of coach them through that phase of life? And then, like I said, because you're sharing your photography work too, they're going to see you as a valuable resource, but they're also going to see your work, hopefully fall in love with your work and end up
Yeah.
hiring you, because you helped them during that time, and then because your work is going to be fantastic.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. Yeah, I have a lot of friends that we kind of have been talking on the topic of it, and they're like, "Where do I start?" And I'm like, "Let's kind of talk through this." But
Just also, I will say too, like, just start and know that your first 5 blog posts might feel like pulling teeth. It might feel horrible, but I promise it gets easier. It's like the
mm,
very beginning that hitting publish is so stressful, but I want you to also remember that, like, probably no one is gonna be reading your first few posts, at least in the early stages, so hitting publish does not mean that, overnight you're gonna have thousands of people reading your
yeah.
post, leaving hate comments because they realized how bad your writing is or that you have a grammatical error. Like, I used to be
Oh my
so careful
goodness.
about that and reread it every post 1,000 times. Just get it out there. No one's going to be reading it, at least at
Yeah.
the beginning. Take your time, read through it a couple times. If it's good, it's good enough. Just get it out into the world.
Yeah,
This will get easier the more you do it.
for sure. Well, I just wanted to share Galen has a free SEO checklist and challenge that she wants to share that's going to be linked in the show notes. So don't forget to go get that. Um, that is going to help you immensely if you're just getting started. But can you tell us before we wrap up, where can people find you on the web and socials?
Yes. So my business is Local Creative. You can find us at localcreative.co, on Instagram at localcreative.co, and then YouTube and TikTok at Local Creative. So
Love
I would
it.
love to connect with you there. But yeah, my website's probably the best spot, or my blog, to come check out all of our recent content.
And if you're a visual learner, check out that YouTube because I know I am. When you're like,
I'm
okay, how do I
loving
do
YouTube.
this? If you are following the Cameras and Coffee podcast, you can find us at karahainesphotography.com/podcast, or you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Cameras and Coffee Podcast. Galen, thank you so much for coming on today. This is so much information that just gonna download, maybe listen to over and over again as I'm trying to figure things out as far as SEO. So much good information. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Friends, this concludes our episode on tackling SEO on your website. And if you want more information, check out the show notes. We're going to have a lot of it in there. But until next time, my friends, cheers.